May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and this Wednesday, May 4th, is World Maternal Mental Health Day. The purpose of World Maternal Mental Health Day is to raise awareness of maternal mental health issues so that more women will get help and fewer will suffer. I am very passionate about the health of mothers and raising awareness about postpartum depression and anxiety and just general postpartum struggles. This week is the start of a 4-week series focused on maternal mental health. In this first episode, I'm going to share my own postpartum anxiety and maternal mental health story. Next week, my friend Britt Davis will share the tragic story of the loss of her friend Allison, and she'll also share her own perinatal and postpartum struggles. In week 3, I'll be talking with my friend Caroline Vasquez about her journey to overcome postpartum anxiety twice. And we'll talk about how she tries to support new moms now. And during week 4, I'll be chatting with Holly Kennedy and Ellen Jones from Mother Tree Wellness about maternal mental health and what we want all new parents to know. Maternal mental health is such an important topic. If you know an expecting or new mother, I encourage you to check in on them and to share this month's episodes with them. And if you're struggling, I hope these episodes help you know that you are not alone, that you can get help and you will recover. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of 2. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. I am definitely a planner, and I'm someone who sets my mind to something and I generally accomplish it. I could go on and on about all the things that I have set my mind to as a kid and as a young adult and accomplished. I like to think that I plan, work hard, and then I have a lot of grit to make sure it happens. And that's exactly how I decided to approach becoming a mother. I moved to the town where I wanted to raise my family. I purchased a house where I wanted to raise said family that didn't exist yet. And then I got pregnant. I had already discussed all of the best parenting and sleep books with all of my friends who already had children, and I knew exactly which books I wanted to read to prepare. And prepare I did. I knew adjusting to motherhood wasn't going to be totally seamless, but I was overly confident that I could execute my plans and grit it out where and when necessary to make my plans come true. Things first started to go a little bit off course when I went in for my first ultrasound and they found a mass on my ovary. One doctor said that they would remove it after I gave birth. One said that we should remove it maybe while I was pregnant since we weren't 100% sure that it was benign. And a third said that it was definitely benign and probably never needed to be removed. This was when I first started to have anxiety. I wasn't sleeping well, and I would get into anxious loops in my head on very random and specific topics. For example, at one point, I was convinced that a tick was going to get on me and latch on, and that I was definitely going to get Lyme disease, and it was going to have a very negative effect on my health and Addison's since I was pregnant at the time. I truly thought about this for endless amounts of hours. I would lay awake at night and just spin on this topic, and then I would start Googling and researching what could happen if I got Lyme disease while I was pregnant. At one point, I actually brought this up to my doctor during one of my visits, and he jokingly asked me if I had ever been professionally treated for anxiety. But then we all just kind of laughed it off. And I think my takeaway, without thinking much about it, was that, geez, I should just keep my crazy thoughts to myself. And then it came time to deliver. And I was not someone who had some detailed birth plan. My birth plan was to get an epidural. But I had a very traumatic delivery. I won't go into all the gory details, but I ended up pushing for 5.5 hours and then I hemorrhaged terribly afterwards. Because of the significant blood loss I experienced, my milk supply never came in. That's a whole other story about what that journey looked like. But long story short, I was tortured by this relentless desire to nurse for about 2 weeks as I attempted to feed my very hungry baby with lots of help from lactation experts, and it just was not coming together. Finally, after 2 weeks, my mom, God bless her, gave me permission to stop, and I stopped. But I was not in a good place in those early weeks. I was filled with guilt about the nursing situation. And, I remember my mom left just around the 2 week mark after Addison was born. And one of my new friends that I had made in that new neighborhood that I moved into shortly before Addison was born wanted to come over and visit. I didn't really feel up for visitors, in part because I was just struggling so much. But I did start to let some people stop by, primarily because I felt obligated to. I didn't want them to think I was nuts because I wouldn't let anyone come by and meet my baby. So, truth be told, those days that visitors came, I kind of would dread them, but they were also the only days I got out of my pajamas. So that was a benefit because it got me up and going some. But those were tough days for me. But I have this very distinct memory of my now good friend Kate stopping by. I didn't know Kate very well at the time, but she was the first person who had had my husband and me over for dinner when we moved into the neighborhood. And I can remember exactly where she was sitting and where I was standing in my family room when she turned to me and said, "How are you? How are you doing?" And then she went on to tell me how she remembered when her first baby was born and everyone was so interested in the baby, when meanwhile she couldn't even sit down. And she felt terrible and really stressed out. And she said she sincerely wanted to know how I was doing. I'll be honest, since I didn't know her very well at that time, I think I just said something like, "I'm still recovering from childbirth, but I'm doing pretty well." I kind of didn't know how to respond to her. But when she left, I shut that front door and I cried. It was, I guess, a cry of relief. I was so relieved to hear that this woman who appeared to have it all together had struggled after having her baby. I felt less alone. And I'm so grateful that she asked me about me that day that she visited, because even though I didn't open up to her, it gave me hope that this would pass, that I could get where she was, that I could get past this hard season. But since I didn't know her that well, I didn't tell her how I was feeling, and I just forged ahead with my guilt and anxiety in silence. And then there was the sleep aspect. I followed the book that I had read to a T. And for a handful of weeks, things seemed to be going according to plan. But as 12 weeks approached, as I was preparing for my maternity leave to end, things started to get worse and worse. I, like many new moms, was already incredibly anxious about heading back to work and also sending my 12-week-old to daycare. So this was just adding to it because I was now having a baby who was sleeping less than they were just a handful of weeks ago. Luckily, the transition to daycare actually went pretty well. I loved my daycare. And other than the fact that she barely slept at all there, which didn't faze me too much because she wasn't sleeping that well at home, I kind of quickly was able to give up on the idea that I had hoped for. I'd hoped that they might teach her to sleep. So the transition went well, but I had to quickly let go of the idea that they could fix this, which is funny in hindsight because daycare providers are not sleep experts. But in my mind, I was thinking, well, they have more experience than me. Hopefully they can fix this issue. So that didn't happen, but the transition to daycare went fairly well. And the interesting and surprising thing was that I actually started to feel a little bit better after I went back to work. So this thing that I had been dreading or feeling anxious about actually helped me. I think it gave me space to do something that felt familiar, that made me feel more like myself. It gave me space to breathe. I remember just sitting in my office and thinking, oh my gosh, I could sit here for 10 minutes and drink a cup of coffee in silence. Like, whoa. So it kind of felt like I was doing something for myself again, which helped. But of course, I then felt guilty about that. I felt guilty that I felt better at work. And as Addison hit 4 months, her sleep hit an all time low. She was waking hourly during the night. I was so tired at her 4 month checkup that I left that appointment and I stood in the lobby of the doctor's office looking through my diaper bag for the car keys like a crazy person. I tore the bag apart. I couldn't find them anywhere. And then all the nurses were trying to help me backtrack to find my keys, went back to the room. I mean, we were all over the place. Finally, I went outside, and what did I find? I found my car still running in the parking lot with the keys in the ignition. That moment pushed me past the anxiety I was experiencing about the idea of sleep training, which the pediatrician told me I definitely needed to do, and realizing that, wow, I'm so tired that I would just leave my car on in the parking lot, really pushed my husband and I to decide to dive in with sleep training. We got support from my best friend who had talked me through all the steps that had worked for her daughter. And that first night was brutal. I remember it very clearly. But then things did get better for a little while. And then they got worse again because Addison has never been a by the book baby or child. So she just wasn't doing what the book said she was going to do. And we slipped back into some of our not so great sleep habits. We were still on this sleep roller coaster when I got an unexpected surprise. When Addison was just 8 months old, I realized that I was once again pregnant. My second pregnancy kind of feels like a blur in my memory now. A few things stand out. I remember lots of vomiting. I had early on the typical sickness in the first few months, and then I had weird intestinal issues, the way she was positioned where my intestines would get blocked and I could eat something, it would come right back out like violently once in a restaurant. I mean, it was terrible. So I have memories of lots of unpredictable vomiting. I was very tired because I wasn't getting great sleep because of Addison and I was pregnant, and my anxiety started to spike right back up again. And it was during this pregnancy that I had my very first panic attack. We were flying back from the Grand Cayman. We had gone on vacation. This is one of the places where I vomited in a restaurant, did not make it to the bathroom. And I had actually flown with Addison many times at this point. At the time, I was on a board that was in another state, and I had taken her to meetings there. We had traveled for holidays. So I had been on several flights with her, and she'd been a really good traveler. So was not anxious about that part. Well, during the last 30 minutes of our flight from the Grand Cayman into Charlotte, Addison must have started to have ear pain or something made her uncomfortable because she lost her ever loving mind and she was arching her back. And I was just trying to hold her so she wouldn't hit her head on the window or the side of the plane because I was in the window seat, 3 deep in. And it was the longest 30 minutes of my life. And I completely unraveled. I don't remember all the specifics other than when that plane touched down, I leapt out of my seat from the window seat, like over my husband, over whatever poor soul was sitting on the aisle, and jumped up into the aisle. And my husband was looking at me with a terrified look because he had no idea what was going on. And a man in the row in front of me who had 2 young kids, he was trying to talk me down. I mean, I think he could tell I was probably having a panic attack. He was trying to reassure me that I was okay and that this happens with babies. I just remember this very kind, calm man trying to talk me off the ledge. because I was freaking out that I had to get off that airplane. So once they finally let me off, I completely left Addison with Mike and I went straight to a bathroom and I locked myself in a bathroom stall in the Charlotte airport. And little fact about me, you guys, I despise public restrooms. In fact, I was just with my in laws and we were talking about when we all went to Italy and how I had to have my sister in laws take the girls to the bathroom so much in Italy because I couldn't even handle the bathrooms. So I will truly avoid a public bathroom at all costs, if at all possible. And here I was locked away in a bathroom stall and I would not come out. I felt like I couldn't leave that stall. Mike kept texting me after so much time went by asking if I was okay, that I needed to come out, that our flight was going to be boarding soon. And I'm telling you, I was truly not planning to come out and get on that flight to go home. I just didn't think I could do it. I don't remember exactly what convinced me to come out, but ultimately, the panic attack eased up and I left that bathroom just in time to get on the flight. But oh my goodness, that was a very scary feeling. And it was like my anxiety just tipped over on that flight. So other than those handful of things, that's all a little bit of a blur during my pregnancy. But my anxiety was definitely growing thinking about having two babies who didn't sleep. So while my labor with Ainsley was a different kind of trauma, the actual laboring part and trying to get the epidural, I was able to get her out after just 2 pushes. Hallelujah. And that was my birth plan, by the way. And I had prepared for her during my many sleepless and anxious nights very differently than I did for Addison. So for one, I was much more open about the idea of nursing and or bottle feeding and being open to the fact that some of this was out of my control. And I ended up doing both. So again, that's a story for another day, but that did go smoother for me and I carried less anxiety and guilt around that specific area. And the second big thing that I had done differently was I had read a lot on the true research of sleep, and I approached her newborn first couple weeks and months very differently on the sleep front. And that different approach, paired with the fact that she was more naturally inclined to sleep, resulted in her sleeping through the night by the time she was 8 weeks old. And she's been a great sleeper ever since. So that part was a huge win. But the downside was that Addison, who now was a toddler, still wasn't sleeping through the night or napping in her crib. And it was killing me. Work was no longer feeling like my place for relief. I was just starting to feel like I wasn't crushing it anywhere. I wasn't killing it at work like I normally would. And I was so tired that I wasn't being the mom that I wanted to be. And I was just in a constant state of being tired, being anxious, and feeling guilty. I felt like I was failing everywhere. Even though from the outside looking in, I probably looked like I had it all together. I think by that point, I'd gotten 2 promotions since I had initially had Addison. So I think it looked like I had it together, but that's definitely not how it felt. And the anxiety during this time was absolutely next level. I mean, I feel like because I had not fully recovered after pregnancy 1, and then I had my anxious pregnancy, and it was just building on itself. So when I would be driving the girls to daycare in the morning, I would have these very vivid visions or images in my head of me crashing my car into a tree. I drive down this narrow 2-lane road out of our neighborhood into town, and there are trees on both sides. And that road, it makes me anxious now to even think about how anxious I was. So it was terrifying. And because I would have these images on this one particular strip, I would dread driving the girls to daycare every morning. And then I would get to my office and I would be sitting in my office and I would suddenly not be able to remember if I actually dropped the girls off at daycare. And on several occasions, I would have to run back outside to make sure that they weren't still sitting in the back seat. So these 2 things were just this constant loop of anxiety and stress in my head. I would have visions of crashing my car and this tremendous fear of forgetting my children in the back seat of the car and them dying of heat because I left them there. Well, it was a very stressful time. And then that first Christmas came with the girls. So Ainsley was born in July. And so that first Christmas, we traveled to my parents' house, and I was not doing well. And Christmas night, we had put the girls to bed, and then Addison woke up just as we were wrapping up our Christmas dinner with the adults. And she had been up all night the night before, and I just could not move from that table to try to go convince her to sleep. So Mike went upstairs and he was soothing her and trying to get her to sleep. And my dad just turned to me and said, "Hey, we are really worried about you." And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I said something along the lines of, "Yeah, I'm worried about myself." And I remember telling him that I had recently heard a story on the news about a mom who drove her car in the lake with four children in the back, her four children in the back. And I found myself feeling so sorry for her. Whereas like the old me would have thought like, what? How could someone do that? But I just remember hearing that story and I felt so sorry for her. And I said I felt sorry for her because I just imagined that she must have been so tired. And he looked pretty shocked when I told him this, that I had this like tremendous empathy for this woman. And then he told me he thought I needed to find some help. And then we had a conversation about the fact that I'm pretty blessed in the fact that I have resources and a supportive husband and the ability to get help, and that I needed to do it. And I needed to take a step forward to get help. I didn't know at the time, and I don't know that he knew at the time exactly what type of help I needed. But what I did know was I needed sleep. That was just this overwhelming feeling that I was so tired. And I had already been in touch with a sleep consultant just before Christmas, but I had just been too overwhelmed to take that step forward. And I was so anxious. And so I just kind of stalled on it. So that conversation with my parents was a conversation I needed to finally take action on that plan. So when we got back home, Mike and I executed the plan that the sleep consultant had given us. And 11 days later, Addison was sleeping through the night and napping like a total champ, which was like life-changing. And after a few weeks of me being able to get some sleep, I could absolutely just feel my anxiety ease up. I started enjoying work again and felt like a much more present and happy mom. My marriage was definitely better, and Addison was noticeably much happier too. I mean, at this point, she was about to turn 2 years old, and she was, a little active toddler, and she was throwing less tantrums. I mean, she was just a much happier little person, and she started to get sick a lot less, which was awesome as well. And so it turns out for me, sleep deprivation was the primary reason that I was staying stuck with my anxiety and those intrusive thoughts. And luckily, once I got consistent sleep, more consolidated sleep on a consistent basis, I recovered without any additional help. And when I look back now at my postpartum journey, well, first of all, I realized I had terrible postpartum anxiety that I did not really see or appreciate at the time. But now I look back at it, I'm like, dang, Allison, how did you not scream from the mountaintops that you needed help? But I look back now and I'm sad that I lived in that state for nearly 2 years without getting help. I wish I had understood how sleep could have helped me so that I would have been able to commit to getting help teaching Addison how to sleep sooner. I also wish that I had told someone I was struggling much sooner than I did. Like when my dad told me that they were worried, it kind of took someone confronting me on it. Confronting is not the right word, but talking to me about it for me to admit that I was struggling. And, I wish I had pushed the issue more during my doctor visits, or that I had confided in my friends like Kate, who was asking about me. I could have confided in one of my friends that was ahead of me in their motherhood journey. I mean, I really wish I had done that because I had several of those friends that probably would have said, hey, we know what's happening here and we can help you get help. I wish I had found a community or a mom group so that I could have had more of a village, because my guess is I would have heard other people talking and thought, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. So I wish I had done that as well. But that felt very overwhelming at the time to think about having to commit to more people. So now when I have friends who are expecting, I am always open about talking about my hard transition into motherhood. And I particularly like to give a heads up to my fellow planners, those who I know are used to planning, setting their mind to something, and getting it done, because motherhood is so stinking humbling. I mean, I don't even care if you didn't have postpartum anxiety or depression, or you generally found the newborn days lovely. Motherhood is humbling. And we do not need to suffer with postpartum depression, anxiety, or just generally not feeling like ourselves in silence. If you are struggling, even if you don't think that you are dealing with postpartum depression or anxiety, please consider confiding in a family member, friend, and or your doctor just to talk some things through. And if you are struggling with postpartum depression and anxiety, you can recover. Thank you so much for listening to my postpartum journey. I hope that you'll come back for the next 3 episodes, because every woman who's joining me on the podcast will be bringing a very unique story to you, and their journeys were all so incredibly unique, and they are so open in their conversations. And I just think there's tremendous value in hearing other women's stories. If you would like to learn more about postpartum depression and anxiety, or are looking for resources, please consider visiting postpartum.net. I'll link to the site in the show notes. And as a reminder, if you are struggling, please know that you are not alone. You are not to blame. With help, you will get better. Postpartum depression and anxiety are treatable. And in case you need to hear this today, you are a great mom and you are doing an awesome job. Bye for now, my friend. Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.